In the stillness of the Oklahoma plains, beneath skies heavy with memory, a car hums along Interstate 40 heading west. Dust coils in the air, stirred by the whisper of wheels on asphalt, as the road stretches like a ribbon into the past. This isn't just a road trip. It's a pilgrimage into the mythos of the American West. The destination, a remote grave, hidden among the trees near the banks of the Canadian River. The grave of a woman once called the Queen of the Bandits. Her name was Myra Maybelle Shirley, but the world came to know her by a different name, Belle Starr. Time folds in on itself as we draw closer. The present dissolves into the echo of hoofbeats and the scent of gunpowder, of silks and revolvers, of defiance wrapped in velvet. Her legend was forged in fire and scandal, shaped by bullets and betrayal, and today we trace her footsteps back to where it all began. She was born into privilege on February 5, 1848, on a quiet farm just outside Carthage, Missouri. The land was fertile, the sky wide, and the future limitless. Her father, Judge John Shirley, was a man of stature, prominent, wealthy, respected. Her mother, Elizabeth Pennington, came from strong roots, a woman of grace and strength. Together they raised a family anchored in Southern tradition and genteel upbringing. Belle had one older brother, Bud, and 3 younger siblings, but it was Bud who would shape her spirit most deeply. She wasn't born into the dust and desperation of outlaw life. No, Belle Shirley was educated, refined. Her father, determined to give her every advantage, helped establish and finance a prestigious girls' academy in Carthage. There, she was immersed in literature, music, and etiquette, the expected hallmarks of a young lady destined for social grace and polite society. But beneath the lace gloves and decorum, something wild stirred. The soul of the frontier whispered to her, louder than hymns, deeper than textbooks. It called her to the open plains, to the crack of rifles and the thunder of hooves. While other girls clung to pianos and poetry, Belle found herself drawn to the saddle, to the wilderness. Her brother Bud, ever her protector and confidant, taught her to ride like a Comanche and shoot with deadly precision. He saw in her not just a sister, but an equal, a kindred spirit with the same hunger for movement, for rebellion, for freedom. Together they would gallop through the Missouri fields like shadows chased by fate. She rode not like a lady, but like a warrior. She shot not for sport, but for the thrill of control. Every breath of dust and gun oil began to weave itself into the fabric of her identity. But privilege, like innocence, is a fragile thing, and Missouri was on the brink of fire. As Belle entered her teenage years, the Civil War descended like a storm upon the land, ripping apart communities and families. Missouri became a fractured battleground where neighbor turned against neighbor, and loyalties were marked in blood. The Shirley family, devout Southern sympathizers, found themselves caught in the crossfire. And Bud, brave, fierce Bud, chose his side with conviction. He joined Quantrill's Raiders, a brutal Confederate guerrilla group that would go down in infamy. There, he rode alongside the most feared names in outlaw legend, Frank and Jesse James, Cole Younger, and other sons of Southern fury. But war takes no favorites and fate shows no mercy. In June of 1864, Bud Shirley was cut down by Union forces. Belle was just 16. The death of her beloved brother shattered whatever threads of innocence remained. It was the wound that never healed, the moment that set her path aflame. Bud had been her compass, her anchor. And now he was gone, swallowed by war, leaving her with grief, rage, and the weight of unfinished vengeance. The world she had known, of academies and parlors, of Sunday dinners and silk dresses, was crumbling around her. The war didn't just end lives, it reshaped destinies, and Belle's would never be ordinary again. So, when the road curves today through the flatlands and the weeds whisper in the wind, we are not merely passing trees and towns, we are traveling through the ghost of a girl who once dreamed of civility only to be baptized in blood and smoke. Belle Starr was not born an outlaw. She was forged by loss, shaped by violence, and awakened by the seductive power of autonomy. Her transformation had begun, and the journey into legend was only just unfolding. And somewhere, beyond the bend and overgrown path, her grave waits, still, silent, watching, The drums of war silenced the dreams of peace. The American Civil War tore the nation apart like a lightning strike through dry timber. And for the Shirley family, nestled in the once quiet corners of Missouri, the impact was not distant. It was immediate, intimate, and irreversible. When the first cannons thundered, Belle was still a young girl, a Southern-bred daughter with braided hair and a heart divided between Sunday dresses and revolvers. But soon the skirts would be traded for saddlebags, and the gospel would be drowned out by gunfire. Missouri became a bleeding borderland, a state split down its spine. Though the official vote kept Missouri in the Union, its soul belonged to the Confederacy. Deeply rooted in Southern loyalties, the Shirleys pledged their allegiance to the South, and Belle's brother Bud didn't just raise a flag. He raised a weapon. He joined Quantrill's Raiders, a name that would become synonymous with shadow warfare, guerrilla ambushes, and unspeakable bloodshed. It was with Captain William Quantrill, a Confederate partisan leader, that Bud Shirley became a soldier of the night, a phantom on horseback, riding through fire-lit towns alongside the likes of Frank and Jesse James Cole Younger, and a dozen others who would later be branded as outlaws. These were not men who obeyed codes of war. They waged vengeance, not strategy. They burned, raided, and executed with ruthless precision, never asking for permission and never granting forgiveness. Belle idolized Bud. To her, he was not a criminal. He was a knight with Southern armor. But even legends bleed, and in June of 1864, the war caught up with him. Union forces hunted him down, and in the chaos of a firefight, Bud was killed, his blood soaking Missouri soil, the same land he had fought to protect. The news shattered Belle. Her world, already fragile, fractured beyond repair. The last tether to her innocence snapped. Her father's eyes dimmed. Her mother wept. And in the quiet of their farmhouse, Belle looked out at a nation on fire and made a silent vow. She would not be a victim of this war. She would become its ghost. After the Confederacy's defeat in 1865, the Shirley family, like many Southern sympathizers, found themselves unwelcome in the new order. Reconstruction punished the loyalists of the South, and men like Judge John Shirley, once prosperous and respected, now lived under scrutiny and suspicion. So they did what many ex-Confederates did. They packed up and went south, not to Georgia or Alabama, but farther, to Texas, where the stars still aligned with Dixie. The Shirley family settled on a farm southeast of Dallas, in the raw red lands of North Texas. It was there that their lives took on a new, darker rhythm. The war was over, but the outlaws it birthed had not disbanded. In fact, they flourished. Texas was a haven for fugitives, ex-soldiers, guns for hire, and the Shirley home, known for its quiet discretion and Confederate roots, became a sanctuary. Riders would appear under moonlight, Jesse James, Frank James, Cole Younger, and more. Some stayed for days, others for weeks. But the name Shirley was whispered with reverence across outlaw camps like a secret password. It was during one of these clandestine visits that Belle met her match. His name was James Reed, a charming, broad-shouldered man with quick hands and quicker words. He rode with Quantrill, too, and Belle claimed he was her first love, kindled back in Missouri before the war stole everything. Their reunion was fire and fate, and on November 1st, 1866, Belle Shirley became Belle Reed. But marriage did not tame her. It ignited her. Belle and Jim moved in with her family, working the land as best they could, trying to pose as a simple frontier couple. But Jim Reed was not a man content with plows and patience. The blood of the war still pulsed in his veins, and he drifted toward old companions, dangerous Cherokee men, especially one whose name would soon haunt Belle's destiny, Tom Starr, a feared tribal figure, known for his ruthlessness and command of the criminal underworld. Together, Jim and Belle had 2 children. In 1868, Belle gave birth to her daughter, Rosalie, whom she affectionately nicknamed Pearl. 3 years later, in 1871, came her son, Edwin, known simply as Ed. But motherhood didn't soften her spirit. It sharpened her resolve. She was a wife, a mother, and now, inevitably, a player in a rising underworld of outlaws, whiskey runners, and horse thieves. Jim Reed, once her warrior, soon became her liability. He dove deeper into criminal circles, stealing, smuggling, and hiding fugitives. He partnered with Tom Starr and his gang, operating a network of illegal trades with Native American territories, profiting from bootleg liquor, stolen horses, and whatever else the law couldn't reach. By 1874, Jim had fallen too far. He was charged with robbery, and Belle, caught in the storm, was accused as an accomplice. Though the charges against her were dropped, her alibi anchored by the fact she was living with her father at the time, the stain on her name remained. For the first time, the law etched a line between Belle Starr and society. That same year, tragedy returned. On the run and hiding near Paris, Texas, Jim Reed was intercepted by lawmen. He refused to surrender. Shots rang out. Jim was killed instantly. Belle became a widow at 26. No tears, no funeral, just another name carved into the annals of the West. She was left with 2 children, a family teetering on financial ruin, and a reputation that now echoed with whispers of gunsmoke and betrayal. But Belle was no victim. She adapted. Where others would mourn, she plotted. And when her father, Judge John Shirley, died in 1876, she made another move that would define the next chapter of her legend. She left Texas and crossed the invisible line into Indian Territory, what we now know as Oklahoma, a lawless land where borders were blurred and names meant less than actions. There, among the thick woods and winding rivers, she reconnected with the Starr family, those same Cherokee outlaws her husband had once run with. But this time, she wasn't just a wife or widow, she was her own force of nature. In the heart of that wilderness, Belle Starr would build an empire, one forged not in brick and stone but in alliance, fear and infamy. And the Queen of the Bandits was just getting started. The wind swept low through the tangled trees of Indian Territory, a land not yet carved into state lines, but already soaked in blood, betrayal, and the whispers of legend. After the death of her first husband, Jim Reed, gunned down in 1874 by a deputy near Paris, Texas, Belle was left a widow at just 26. Alone with 2 children and a tarnished name, she returned to her father as home, a place where memories clung to the walls like shadows too stubborn to leave. But fate was not yet finished with Myra Maybelle Shirley. In 1876, another grave opened, this time for her father, Judge John Shirley. With his death, the last remnants of Belle's respectable past crumbled. The man who once funded her education and polished her image as a refined Southern lady was gone. What remained was a fiercely independent woman, shaped by grief, defiance, and a burning will to survive in a world ruled by violence and men. It was around this time that Belle made the fateful decision to leave the shrinking security of her past behind and head deeper into the heart of outlaw country. She moved to the rugged terrain of Indian Territory, where she reunited with the Starr family, a name that carried both reverence and fear among the Cherokee Nation. The patriarch, Tom Starr, had long been a figure of power in the region, and it was under his roof that Belle found not only shelter but purpose. In 1880, she married Sam Starr, Tom's adopted son, a young charismatic Cherokee with a checkered past and a taste for danger. Belle, who claimed to be 27, was in fact 32 at the time. But numbers didn't matter in this world. Power did, presence did, and Belle Starr had both. Together, Belle and Sam built a new life on a 62-acre ranch along the Canadian River, in a place that would soon become infamous, Younger's Bend, named in homage to her family as old friends, the Younger brothers. There, in the shadows of tangled brush and wide skies, Belle constructed not just a home, but a fortress for the damned. Younger's Bend became a sanctuary for criminals, renegades, and outlaws seeking a safe place to lie low. She was no longer just Belle. She became the Bandit Queen. Belle's reputation grew not only for harboring fugitives, but for her own role in their operations. She organized the logistics, hid stolen goods, laundered horses, and paid off lawyers when the law got too close. She didn't just tolerate the outlaw life, she orchestrated it. She wore black velvet riding dresses and wide-brimmed hats adorned with plumes. Her pearl-handled pistols rested on each hip, holstered, but always ready. She could ride like a Comanche and shoot with deadly precision. Her presence was theatrical, but her influence was very real. Men respected her, feared her, and some loved her. She knew how to manipulate charm like a weapon, and she wielded it with the same finesse as her Colt revolver. But the law was closing in. In 1882, Belle and Sam were arrested and charged with horse theft, one of the gravest offenses on the frontier, especially under federal jurisdiction. Their case was brought before Judge Isaac Parker, the infamous hanging judge of Fort Smith, Arkansas, a man known for his unyielding sentences and grave courtroom. After a dramatic 4-day trial, Belle and Sam were each sentenced to 9 months in prison. Belle, ever the enigma, managed to maintain her charm behind bars. She was said to be a model prisoner, polite, reserved, and even friendly with some of the guards. Sam, on the other hand, struggled more with confinement, his temper and pride often getting the better of him. Upon their release, the couple returned to Younger's Bend, more determined than ever. Rather than retreat, Belle doubled down. She refined her criminal enterprise, managing it like a business. She was the brains. Sam was the brawn. Together, they re-established their network: outlaws, scouts, informants, and loyal followers who knew that crossing Belle's Starr meant one thing: retribution. The press caught wind of her exploits and began weaving her image into the fabric of American outlaw mythology. She became a sensation. Her photos, always styled with flair, appeared in newspapers. Her exploits were romanticized, exaggerated, and passed from town to town like scripture. Children whispered her name in awe. Lawmen cursed it under their breath. Yet behind the legend was a woman constantly navigating loss and danger. The frontier had taken her brother, her first husband, and her father, and it would soon come for more. In December of 1886, tragedy struck again. Sam Starr was killed in a gunfight with a tribal officer. The details were hazy, but the impact on Belle was not. For the second time, she was a widow, and once again left to defend her land and legacy in a world not made for women who rode with guns and ruled over men. To protect her property, which under Cherokee law could only be owned by a member of the tribe or a spouse, Belle married Jim July, Sam Starr's adopted brother. It was a strategic move, not a romantic one. Jim was much younger, and the relationship was strained from the start. Tensions flared between Jim and Belle's children, especially her son Ed. The house at Younger's Bend, once a haven, became a nest of quiet feuds and buried resentment. Despite the chaos, Belle held on. She continued to fight, in the courts, in her home, and on horseback. She fought for her land, for her freedom, for her name. But time was catching up to the bandit queen. In the years to come, betrayal would simmer, vengeance would rise, and blood would once again be spilled on the soil of Younger's Bend. And Belle Starr's story was racing toward its violent end. After her release from prison in 1883, Belle Starr didn't retreat into obscurity. Instead, she embraced the shadows of her former world with even greater purpose. Prison had not broken her, it had refined her. What emerged from the cell was not a disgraced woman, but a queen hardened by bars and betrayal, one now determined to rule her own criminal empire from the outlaw sanctuary of Younger's Bend. Using the knowledge gleaned from her time with men like Jim Reed and Sam Starr, Belle began to orchestrate a sophisticated web of illegal activity. She was no longer merely the partner of outlaws, she was the architect. Every move was deliberate, every plan crafted with meticulous care. She recruited outlaws and drifters, offering them shelter and protection in exchange for loyalty. Her home became a hive of criminal enterprise, its walls echoing not with domestic life, but with the plotting of horse thieves, bootleggers, and renegades. What made Belle truly dangerous wasn't her pistol, it was her mind. She used the wealth acquired from fencing stolen goods to hire the best lawyers money could buy. She paid bail for her associates, ensuring their silence and devotion. Her ability to manipulate the legal system was just as formidable as her aim. Word began to spread. If you needed a second chance, or if you needed a place to disappear, Belle Starr was your salvation. For a price. The law, of course, continued its pursuit. In 1886, Belle faced charges for robbing a farmer near Younger's Bend. 3 months later, she stood trial again, this time for unknowingly gifting a stolen horse to a friend. But despite the charges, Belle Starr walked free, twice. The evidence was never enough. Witnesses feared her. Judges suspected her, but no one could quite catch her. She was becoming more than a criminal. She was a legend. That legend, however, was built on blood, and blood would not let her rest. The year 1886 marked another turning point in Belle's life, not in the courtroom, but at home. Her second husband, Sam Starr, was embroiled in a violent altercation with a tribal police officer. Gunfire rang out. When the smoke cleared, Sam was dead, and Belle once again was a widow. She stood over his body not just in grief, but in anger. She knew what his death meant. Under tribal law, only a Cherokee or the spouse of a Cherokee could legally hold land in the territory. Sam's death placed her ownership of Younger's Bend in jeopardy. Belle, ever the strategist, moved quickly. Her solution was as calculated as any of her heists. She married Jim July, Sam Starr's adopted brother. It was a union forged not by love, but necessity. Jim July was younger than Belle by nearly a decade, ambitious, proud, and eager to carve a name for himself. But he didn't just marry into land, he married into chaos. From the beginning, the marriage was rocky. July struggled under Belle's dominance. He resented her power, and Belle's children, Pearl and Ed, resented him. Tensions in the household boiled beneath every meal, every glare. The walls of Younger's Bend, once a fortress of solidarity, now trembled with division. Pearl, Belle's daughter, soon found herself pregnant. Belle, a woman who had spent her life challenging convention, balked at her daughter's choices. Furious and ashamed, she sent Pearl away to Arkansas to live with her grandmother, insisting the baby be born far from Younger's Bend. But Pearl, like her mother, had her own will. She named the baby Flossie and returned to the world not as a shamed woman, but as one determined to survive. When she became involved in prostitution, Belle saw it as both disgrace and danger. Belle launched a bitter legal battle to gain custody of her granddaughter, hoping to sever the influence of a daughter who reminded her too much of herself. Meanwhile, Belle's son Ed was carving his own legacy, a darker one. He was arrested and imprisoned for horse theft, plunging the family name further into scandal. Yet Belle, ever the matriarch, paid top attorneys to fight for his release. When Ed returned home, it was not to gratitude, but to growing resentment. The son who had once idolized his mother now looked upon her as a tyrant. He didn't stay long. One evening, Ed left Younger's Bend in a fury, the echoes of arguments and slamming doors trailing behind him. Neighbors would later whisper of the rage in his voice, of the way he spoke of his mother, not with respect but with venom. The household was fracturing. Belle Starr, once the undisputed queen of Younger's Bend, now ruled over a crumbling court. Her children were either estranged or dangerous. Her husband was young, volatile, and slipping from her control. Her power, though still formidable, was surrounded by enemies. Some outside her home, others under her very roof, and somewhere in the distance, death was watching, patient and ready. The twilight of Belle Starr's life had begun, and the storm was gathering fast. She could still hear the distant gallop of hooves through the forest, could still smell the gunpowder, could still see the faces of Jesse James and Cole Younger in her dreams. But her world, the world of outlaws and legends, was fading, and the bullet that would end it all was already loaded. Under the dense curtain of late winter in 1889, the Canadian River ran low and brown, slicing through the Oklahoma frontier like a scar. The trees were bare, skeletal, their branches grasping at the gray sky as if they too sensed the closing of an era. Belle Starr, now in her early 40s, no longer rode with the same restless fire of her youth, but she remained a figure of fear and fascination, an iron-willed woman whose name still carried the weight of legend. Yet behind the velvet and revolvers, behind the myth and the menace, something was cracking. The world was changing, and the shadows around Younger's Bend were deepening. It began with a man named Edgar Watson. He arrived from the swamps of Florida, rough-edged and ambitious, purchasing land not far from Belle's ranch. He came with coin, with charm, and with the kind of past that stank of blood and whispers. Belle, ever the strategist, sensed the danger beneath his polished manners. Stories trickled in, rumors of murder, of a body left behind in Florida marshland. Some said he had fled under the weight of a bounty. Others claimed the law had turned a blind eye. Belle didn't care for hearsay, but she did care for what walked near her empire. Watson handed her gold, bought grazing rights on her land, and for a brief time there was peace. But then came the whisper from Fort Smith. A man matching Watson's description was wanted for the cold-blooded killing of a farmer back east. Belle's instincts flared. She tried to return the money, tried to sever ties before his presence cost her everything. But Watson, sharp-eyed and unapologetic, refused to leave. His pride, like Belle's, was a loaded gun, cocked and waiting. Tension crackled between them like dry timber in a drought. The tribal council took notice. Already under scrutiny for her past, Belle received a warning. Harboring another fugitive, especially one as infamous as Watson, could cost her the land she had clawed to claim. For a woman who had already buried 2 husbands, seen her name twisted by newspapers, and fought courtrooms and gunmen alike, this was a new kind of war, a slow erosion of power, of standing, of safety. But she would not yield. Belle Starr never yielded. Then came February 2nd, 1889. The morning was brittle with cold, the wind biting like memory. Belle prepared to ride with her husband, Jim July, to Fort Smith for legal business. The marriage was a shell by now, thin and cracking. He was younger, reckless and increasingly erratic. Arguments had become routine, silences even more so. But that day, something snapped. Along the road, tempers flared. Words were exchanged, cutting final. Belle, proud and boiling, turned her horse and declared she would go back alone. Jim July rode on, leaving her to the quiet road, the pale sky, and the ghost-colored trees. She rode her mare, Venus, in silence, the trail familiar, the air growing heavier with each mile. She was within sight of her home, less than 100 yards from the porch, the chimney still trailing smoke, when it happened. The first shot hit her in the back, tearing through her spine. She slumped in the saddle, fingers clawing at the reins. Before she could cry out, a second shot shattered her cheekbone, blowing through her face. Venus reared, panicked, then galloped forward with her lifeless rider sagging over the saddle horn, blood soaking her coat like spilled ink. The horse arrived at Younger's Bend alone. Pearl was the first to see it. The sight of her mother's mount, riderless, trembling and wet with sweat, struck like a hammer to the chest. She ran across the clearing, boots breaking frozen earth, heart pounding with a dread too old for her years. She found her mother collapsed in the dust and grass, blood pooling beneath her, eyes wide and glassy. Belle Starr died in Pearl's arms. No final words, no gun in hand, just silence and the cold grip of betrayal. News spread fast. The bandit queen was dead. Some whispered it was Jim July, enraged and emasculated. Others pointed to Watson, whose threats had grown bolder, his presence darker. A few even dared to suggest it had been her own son, Ed, whose hatred had festered in silence for too long. No name was safe, no motive pure. Her funeral was simple but charged with reverence. She was buried in the yard of her own home, beneath the soil she had defended with gunpowder and grit. Pearl had a statue placed at the grave, a horse cast in iron, mid-gallop, its mane forever blown by an unseen wind. She carved an epitaph that read, not as mourning but as defiance. She was a legend before death, and now she is immortal. That grave became a marker not just of one woman, but of an era, the end of an age where law was a suggestion, and women had to forge their own crowns from bullets and bone. The tomb still stands, nestled in wild grass and guarded by silence. Visitors leave flowers, trinkets, and sometimes revolver cartridges, a tribute to the woman who once made lawmen tremble and headlines burn. But justice never came. Investigators combed the trail. In the mud near the Canadian River they found footprints, fresh, deliberate, and waiting. Whoever fired those shots had lain in ambush, hidden in the underbrush, watching. They found tracks leading west, toward Edgar Watson's land. At his homestead, the sheriff found a rifle with a warm barrel and powder still fresh on the stock. But when the questions came, Watson stood tall. He admitted nothing, claimed the weapon had been fired at vermin, denied knowing Belle had been killed, and, crucially, no outstanding warrant could be proven from Florida. The record was clean enough to clear him. He walked free. Rumors clung to him like smoke. Belle's supporters accused him of the murder until the end of his days, but the courts found nothing conclusive. Others said it was Jim July, driven to madness by pride and betrayal. Still others whispered Ed, who had vanished not long after the burial, was the only one with both motive and means. But no charges were ever filed, no justice served. Belle Starr, the bandit queen, had been gunned down not in a duel or a raid, but in a coward's ambush, by a hand that feared her more alive than dead. And so her legend calcified in blood. The years rolled on. Oklahoma became a state. The Wild West was paved and photographed, turned into museum pieces and cowboy songs. But somewhere near the bend of that quiet river, her story still lingers. The wind there carries more than dust. It carries hoofbeats and echoes. A woman once named Myra Maybelle Shirley, raised in southern gentility, transformed by war, crowned by outlaws, and felled by shadows, lies beneath the soil. And if you listen closely, when the night is still and the stars hang low, you might hear the jingle of spurs, the creak of saddle leather, and the whisper of velvet in the dark. Belle Starr rides on. The story didn't end with the grave. The bullets that felled Belle Starr may have silenced her voice, but they ignited a storm of accusations, betrayals, and secrets that would burn through Indian territory long after her blood dried in the Oklahoma dust. The queen of the bandits had fallen, but her death left a crown no one could wear, only destroy. The first to point fingers was Edgar Watson. Weeks after the killing, in a tone laced with performative concern, Watson approached local authorities and delivered a carefully calculated claim. Jim July, Belle's young and volatile third husband, had come to him the afternoon of the murder. According to Watson, July had borrowed his shotgun under the pretense of hunting, but Watson insisted he'd suspected something darker. When pressed, he said July had been ranting, drunk and furious about Belle, about betrayal, about how she had made a fool of him before the outlaws and tribes alike. He had said it plainly, "She'll regret the day she turned her back on me." A storm of suspicion erupted. Jim July had motive, rage, wounded pride. The law took notice. Rumors had already cast him in the shadows around Belle's death, but Watson's accusation was gasoline on embers. Deputies were sent to apprehend July near a creek where he was known to camp. When they approached, calling his name, he answered with lead. Gunfire shattered the forest silence. July resisted arrest with the fury of a man who knew the noose was tightening. Shots were exchanged in the cold twilight. When it was over, Jim July lay bleeding in the dirt, his side torn open, his arm limp, blood soaking the roots of the land he once claimed. He was taken into custody, barely conscious, slipping between pain and delirium. At the jailhouse in Fort Smith, he whispered through cracked lips that he would confess, but only to Deputy Hutchins, a man he trusted more than most. Hutchins was away at the time, and word was sent for his immediate return. For hours, July drifted in and out of lucidity, begging guards to keep him awake, to keep him alive long enough to speak. But fate, as always, took its own path. Hutchins never made it in time. Jim July died just before dawn, clutching his side, whispering to an empty room. Whatever truth he carried, if he carried any, died with him. No confession, no closure, only silence. And so the mystery deepened. In the absence of answers, theories bloomed like weeds. Some claimed Watson had engineered the entire affair, using July's instability to orchestrate the perfect murder while keeping his own hands clean. Others believed Watson feared Belle's influence and took her out before she could threaten his standing with the council. But without proof, the law could only speculate. Watson would eventually leave the territory altogether, drifting into the background of outlaw law like a shadow never caught. But then came a voice no one expected. Flossie, the granddaughter of Belle Starr. Years later, as an adult reflecting on family trauma, Flossie stunned local historians by making a quiet but damning claim. It was Ed, Belle's own son, who pulled the trigger. According to Flossie, Ed had grown increasingly resentful in the months before Belle's death. The once loyal son had become bitter, jealous of her authority, angered by her control, and humiliated by her constant interference in his affairs. He had returned to Younger's Bend after imprisonment with a chip on his shoulder and a pistol always within reach. The two had argued constantly about money, about land, about loyalty, about power. Flossie claimed she overheard Ed once say that his mother would rather see me dead than let me be my own man. No one wanted to believe it. The idea that Belle Starr, Queen of the Bandits, mother of legends, matriarch of an outlaw empire, was murdered not by a rival, not by a lawman, but by her own son was too bitter to swallow. But whispers have their own gravity. Ed, when questioned informally, never denied the possibility outright. He simply said, "Mama made more enemies than friends. You'll be chasing ghosts if you keep looking." He left the territory not long after. Some say he changed his name. Others claim he drank himself into oblivion in some Texas town no one remembers. Pearl never spoke publicly of her brother again. The family fractured completely. The legend calcified. The case remained cold. Historians came and went, poking through old court records, yellowed letters, and contradictory testimonies. The facts never changed. Belle Starr was shot in the back and then in the face, ambushed on the road home. The footprints in the mud led west. The gun had been fired. The suspects had motives. But the truth was always just beyond reach. Some say Watson did it and July took the fall. Some say July did it and death sealed his lips. Some say Ed did it and guilt drove him mad. Others still claim a mystery man, one never named, delivered the fatal shots out of some old vendetta, then disappeared into the prairie like a ghost with a smoking gun. And some say Belle Starr was too dangerous to live and too powerful to fade. So fate did what bullets couldn't. It silenced her so the myth could live. Today, her grave still rests in the woods by the river, marked by a horse statue and a weathered epitaph. Visitors come from across the country to stand in silence, to lay down black roses or revolver shells, and to ask questions that have no answers. They come not just for Belle. They come for the echo of a world now gone, a world of smoke and steel, of defiant women and deadly men, of loyalty and betrayal carved into the dirt of the frontier. They come for the legend that was written not in ink, but in gunpowder. Belle Starr remains a riddle wrapped in legend, buried beneath a name that still makes outlaws pause. Her life was fire, her death shadow, and her legacy a story told in whispers by those who still believe the Old West never truly died. It just rode deeper into the wilderness. If you were moved by Belle Starr's story, if you felt the wind of the prairie, the heat of betrayal, the cold weight of justice delayed, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. More legends are coming, and the West still has secrets to tell.